We've all had moments like this. You're sitting quietly on a porch swing, feeling the afternoon sun warm your shoulders, or maybe walking slowly through the aisles of a grocery store, just picking up a few things for dinner. Then suddenly a shift. You glance around and realize no one is looking where you're looking. No one is thinking what you're thinking. It's a moment of quiet clarity, like the world has tilted just slightly. You see people chatting, focused on their phones, choosing apples, loading bags. Each one of them, every stranger you pass, is living a life as full, as vivid, as complicated as yours. They have memories, heartbreaks, inside jokes, unpaid bills, dreams, routines, and regrets. They are, each of them, the center of their own experience. This realization has a name. It's called Sonder, a term coined to describe the sudden awareness that everyone around you is living a life just as deep and rich as your own. It's humbling, and it's profoundly powerful, because in that flash of awareness, something shifts. You begin to see the world not as a fixed stage with one spotlight, but as a vast and fluid theater of consciousness, where every person carries their own spotlight, their own narrative, their own truth. Now, this isn't just poetic sentiment. There is compelling science that backs this up. Neuroscientists studying what's called the default mode network have found that the human brain is constantly simulating the minds of others. In fact, the regions of the brain most active when we are at rest, the medial prefrontal cortex, the posterior cingulate cortex, the temporoparietal junction, are all involved in imagining the experiences of others. Your brain, quite literally, is built for empathy and perspective. It wants to understand what others are seeing, thinking, and feeling. This means that even in stillness, your mind is reaching out. But let's take this deeper. Imagine sitting on a park bench and watching the people pass. Each of them has thoughts running through their heads that you'll never know. Yet science tells us those thoughts, those quiet, unseen experiences, are as neurologically real as any physical action. According to brain imaging studies using fMRI, the same brain areas light up when someone imagines an experience as when they actually live it. That means the elderly man across from you reliving a fishing trip from 1954 is, in his own mind, back on the water with the line tugging his hand. Memory and moment collapse into one. The subjective becomes real. This leads us into powerful philosophical territory. If everyone around us is living a life as real and complex as our own, then whose story is the true one? Is there a single reality, or are we each weaving our own into the collective tapestry? This question isn't new. Philosophers have asked it for centuries. William James, the father of American psychology, wrote, "The world of our experience is but one of many, each overlapping and intertwining." In other words, the world isn't just out there, it's also in here, within our minds and perceptions. So what does this mean for how we live? It means that our awareness, our attention matters. It means that taking time to genuinely see another person, to listen, to understand their perspective, is more than kindness. It is participation in the shared creation of reality. When you recognize the inner world of another, you're not just being polite. You're being profoundly human. You're stepping into the deeper truth that we are all, always, both observers and performers in this vast play of consciousness. And here's something practical. Next time you find yourself frustrated in traffic or standing in a slow-moving line, remember Sonder. Picture the person ahead of you not as an obstacle but as a universe. Remind yourself that you too are being observed, that your quiet patience might ripple outward. The science of emotional contagion tells us that moods spread between people like invisible waves. Your calm becomes someone else's anchor. Your smile becomes someone's relief. In this way, philosophy becomes a practice. Neuroscience becomes a guide. And awareness becomes an act of creation. The next time you look around and feel that no one else is watching what you're watching, let that be your moment. Your moment to remember that you are not alone, not disconnected. You are part of something immeasurably larger. You are a voice in a great silent chorus. And that chorus is singing the song of what it means to be alive together. Imagine walking into a quiet room in your home. Maybe it's the study or a spare bedroom. The door creaks open and you step inside. No one has been in there for hours. Everything is as you left it, the lamp sitting still, the candle half burned on the shelf, the window cracked open just slightly. You look around and think, of course it all kept going without me. But pause for a moment. How do you know? You assume the candle burned down, that time marched on uninterrupted, that the room behaved itself in your absence. But what if reality isn't quite as obedient as we think? What if that steady, logical continuity is not an inherent property of the universe, but rather the result of your attention to it, your observation of it? This isn't just abstract musing. It's a question that's haunted physicists and philosophers alike. George Berkeley, an 18th-century Irish philosopher, boldly proposed that nothing exists independently of our perception. He suggested that to be is to be perceived, a notion that has come to be known as subjective idealism. That means, in essence, the tree falling in a forest with no one to hear it doesn't just fall silently, it may not fall at all. It might not even be there. For Berkeley, the only reason the universe remains intact when we aren't looking is because it is always being observed by something greater, namely God. Many found this idea absurd. After all, it feels obvious that the world continues when we turn our backs. And yet, 3 centuries later, science began to whisper a similar story. In the early 20th century, the field of quantum mechanics emerged and disrupted our neat picture of a clockwork universe. One of its strangest and most powerful revelations came from an experiment known as the double-slit test. When particles like electrons are fired through 2 slits onto a screen, they behave like waves, spreading out and interfering with each other until someone watches. The moment a measurement is taken to determine which slit the particle went through, it behaves like a particle again, collapsing into a fixed point. The mere act of observation changes the outcome. This isn't magic. It's been repeated in laboratories for decades. Nobel laureate Richard Feynman called it the only mystery of quantum physics and urged students to accept its weirdness, because it refuses to behave any other way. This strange relationship between observation and reality challenges the way we live and think, especially for those of us raised to believe in a solid, objective world that exists regardless of what we think of it. But here's the practical side. What if your attention, your presence really matters more than you think? What if you're not just witnessing the world but shaping it through your interactions, your measurements, your perceptions? Neuroscience supports this idea in a different light. Studies on neuroplasticity show that what we focus on literally changes the physical structure of our brains. A person who practices gratitude sees growth in the prefrontal cortex. Someone who dwells in stress or fear strengthens the neural pathways for those feelings. In other words, your mind doesn't just perceive reality, it sculpts it. You might be wondering, how can this help me in my everyday life? Consider this. If observation alters reality, then the way you choose to engage with the world matters. If you wake up and greet the morning not with dread, but with curiosity, you're not just changing your mood, you're participating in a shift of experience. When you listen deeply to someone rather than rushing to respond, you're not just being polite. You're creating a new outcome in that conversation, new meaning, and perhaps new healing. Your attention is an instrument. The question is, how do you wish to play it? And if you're still skeptical, that's healthy. But remember this, in 2022, the Nobel Prize in Physics was awarded to scientists who demonstrated, through quantum entanglement experiments, that the properties of particles can be influenced by other particles across vast distances instantly and without direct contact. This non-locality means the universe may not be as separate or segmented as we believed. It might be entangled, woven together not by space and time, but by observation and relationship. So when you walk into that quiet room again, look closely. Don't just assume the world persisted as it always does. Know that your presence might be doing more than just watching. It might be calling something into being. And when you leave that room, carry that awareness with you. Let it guide how you speak, how you listen, how you notice. Give your attention like it matters, because it just might be one of the most powerful forces in the universe. Picture 2 old friends sitting across from each other at a kitchen table. One pours coffee while the other tells a story from decades ago. As they laugh and remember, something remarkable is happening, not just in memory, not just in nostalgia, but in physics. Though we can't see it, though we might never feel it directly, their interaction, their presence, is participating in the act of shaping reality itself. This might sound far-fetched, But the deeper we peer into the world of quantum mechanics, the more we discover that reality isn't built like a brick wall. It's more like a conversation. And in that conversation, we are not silent observers. We are active participants. Let me take you into a piece of science that changed the world. In the 1970s, physicist John Clauser ran a version of an experiment based on what is called Bell's theorem. He studied photons, tiny particles of light that were once linked or entangled. When two particles become entangled, their states remain mysteriously connected no matter how far apart they drift. Imagine whispering into the ear of one firefly in your garden, and another firefly halfway across the country flashing in response instantly, without delay. That's the scale of what Clauser found. His results demonstrated something that stunned the scientific community. Locality, the idea that objects are only influenced by their immediate surroundings, no longer held firm at the quantum level. In 2022, Clauser shared the Nobel Prize for this work, confirming that entangled particles don't play by our everyday rules. When one is observed, the other reacts regardless of distance. This phenomenon challenges one of our most basic assumptions about how the world works, that things are separate, that space matters, that action here cannot instantly affect something over there. Now, what does this have to do with your life, your kitchen table, your ordinary days? Everything. Because it forces us to reconsider what it means to be connected. It means your thoughts, your intentions, your acts of kindness or indifference may be participating in a web of relations that reach far beyond what your senses can track. It brings new weight to your presence. When you speak to someone with care, when you listen without judgment, when you direct your attention with intention, you are not just performing etiquette. You are creating outcomes, altering dynamics, perhaps even shaping fields of reality that ripple beyond your knowing. Philosophically, this resonates with ancient wisdom. The Stoics believed we are all part of a larger logos, a universal intelligence. Eastern traditions have long spoken of the illusion of separateness, the idea that all things are interdependent. And now, quantum science gives new language to that vision. Reality may not be a static backdrop where events happen like marionettes on strings. It may be something more fluid, responsive, participatory. As physicist John Archibald Wheeler put it, we live in a participatory universe. His famous phrase, "it from bit," suggests that every physical object is, at its core, rooted in information binary choices, yes or no answers, exchanged between observer and observed. Reality is not made of stuff, but of relationships. And we are the questioners, the choosers, the observers bringing form to the formless. Practically speaking, this means that awareness is power. Attention is not just focus, it is contribution. Every time you choose to pay attention to what matters to beauty, to justice, to compassion, you're helping define the shape of reality. And every time you allow fear or bitterness to shape your gaze, you may be reinforcing the very patterns you'd rather see changed. So here's a gentle action to take. At least once today, slow down and notice something you usually ignore. A sound in the distance, a leaf trembling in the breeze, a person's tone, not just their words. Bring your full presence to that moment, because presence isn't passive, it's creative. And when you hear the news, full of division and despair, remember entanglement. Remember that connection can be real even without touch, that influence can travel in ways we do not yet understand. You may not be able to fix the world, but you can tend to your small part of it, knowing now that small doesn't mean insignificant. Science and philosophy together are pointing us to something deeply hopeful, that the universe is not indifferent, and neither are we. We belong to each other in ways more profound than space and time can measure. Let us live like that is true. Imagine the night sky above your backyard, stars blinking silently across the dark, scattered across a canvas that seems endless. You've looked up at that sky many times, maybe with a sense of wonder, maybe with questions you never quite voiced aloud. What is all of this? What am I doing in it? And maybe the oldest question of all, is someone or something watching it all unfold? For centuries, we assumed the universe was a vast machine, indifferent and mechanical, following laws set in motion long before we arrived. But what if consciousness, your very awareness, your ability to ask that question, is not an accident riding on biology, but something far deeper, something woven into the fabric of existence itself. This is the growing suggestion of a radical yet ancient idea making its return through modern science and philosophy. That consciousness is not something we have, but something we are, and more strikingly, something that everything might possess. Let's begin with what we know from within. Neuroscientists have tried to locate the precise origins of consciousness in the brain, scanning regions like the thalamus and prefrontal cortex, observing neural oscillations and information flows. And yet, despite all our technology, we have never found the switch that flips consciousness on. We can identify correlates of consciousness patterns that appear when people report awareness, but we cannot explain why those patterns lead to experience. This dilemma is called the hard problem of consciousness, coined by philosopher David Chalmers. It's hard not because we lack data, but because even with all our data, we cannot explain why a bunch of firing neurons feels like anything at all. Why should electricity moving through tissue give rise to the taste of coffee, the memory of your mother's voice, the ache of a lost friend? One bold hypothesis steps into this gap: panpsychism, or more broadly, cosmopsychism. It proposes that consciousness is not emergent from complexity, like heat from fire, but rather it is a fundamental property of the universe, like space, time, or mass. In this view, even the smallest particles contain a tiny glimmer of awareness, not a mind, not thoughts, but a point of experience, a subjective flicker. These flickers don't resemble human consciousness until arranged in complex ways, like cells forming a brain, but the raw ingredient is always there. This idea isn't just poetic. It's supported by some interpretations of quantum mechanics, where observation appears to collapse probabilities into actual outcomes. But if observation is so central, then what counts as an observer? Is it just a human with a measuring device, or could it be any system that registers information? Physicist Carlo Rovelli offers a clue through his theory of relational quantum mechanics. He suggests that every physical interaction is a kind of observation. When two particles meet, they exchange information. From their perspective, something is measured. The universe, then, is constantly observing itself. This makes the question, does the moon exist when no one is looking, less about whether a human is watching and more about whether any system, even an atom, is registering its existence. In a very real sense, the universe is never unattended. It is in conversation with itself every moment at every level. Now imagine yourself not as separate from this dialogue, but as one of its more complex expressions. Your thoughts, memories, and perceptions are not exceptions in an unconscious cosmos. They are evolutions of a principle that may be present in all things. That's not mysticism. That's a reframing of the data we already have. And what does this mean for daily life? It means that consciousness isn't just a candle flickering in the dark, destined to go out. It might be part of the very structure of the dark. It means that your awareness isn't a private accident, but part of a grand unfolding. This can change how we relate to ourselves and each other. If you see every living thing, every person, animal, even every tree or river as participating in this field of consciousness, then compassion is no longer a virtue. It becomes a form of recognition. When you care for others, you are acknowledging the same light that shines within you. And when you care for yourself, especially in moments of struggle, you're nurturing the very intelligence the universe may be made of. So here's something you can do. Begin to treat awareness itself as sacred. When you sit with a friend or a grandchild, bring your full presence. Listen not just with your ears but with your whole being. That attention you give is not trivial. It is alignment. It is participation. When you walk outside and feel the sun on your skin or the breeze pass through your hair, don't rush past it. Let your consciousness meet the world in stillness. Because stillness is not emptiness. It is relationship without noise. In those moments, you are not just a witness to the universe. You are a part of the very fabric that holds it all together. And the next time you look up at the night sky, imagine that it too is looking back, not with eyes or words, but with a quiet intelligence that mirrors your own. You are not alone in your awareness. You are surrounded by it. You are of it. You belong. There is a moment, perhaps in the quiet after breakfast or during an evening walk, when a thought rises gently in your mind. Is any of this truly real? the kitchen table, the hum of the refrigerator, the breeze brushing your cheek as you pass a flowering tree, the memories of your childhood home. How do we know it all exists as we think it does? And more curiously, what role does our mind play in shaping it? For many years, science and philosophy moved in parallel lanes, one focused on matter, the other on meaning. But today, they are curving together, slowly and with purpose, suggesting something profound, that the stories we tell about the world may not just describe it, but actually help define it. Reality, it seems, is not something we merely witness. It may be something we participate in creating. Let's begin with the work of physicist John Archibald Wheeler, who proposed a revolutionary idea called the participatory universe. He believed that the physical world, the world of stars, stones, and rivers, does not exist in a fixed state, waiting passively for us to find it. Instead, it comes into form through the questions we ask of it, through the information we gather, through our interaction. He used the phrase "it from bit" to describe this process, meaning that every object, is built from a bit of information, a yes or no question answered by measurement, observation, or intention. In this view, asking the right question doesn't just reveal reality. It brings it into being. And this is not idle speculation. Experiments like the delayed choice quantum eraser have demonstrated that the very act of choosing what kind of measurement to make even after a particle has passed through a detector can retroactively determine how it behaved. This breaks our everyday sense of cause and effect, but it points toward a deeper truth. The universe does not simply happen. It responds. So what does this mean for the way we live? It means our attention, our curiosity, and even our choices matter in ways we never imagined. And while quantum mechanics often feels distant from daily life, the principles it reveals are echoed in how our brains and bodies interact with the world. Neuroscience has shown that our thoughts physically shape our brains through a process called neuroplasticity. Repeated thoughts and actions strengthen certain neural pathways, reinforcing patterns of behavior and perception. In other words, the more often you tell yourself the world is full of possibility, the more your brain wires itself to see those possibilities. The more often you dwell in fear or resentment, the more the world appears cold and closed. This is not magical thinking. It is measurable biology. Your thoughts shape your brain, and your brain shapes how you experience reality. But perhaps even more important is what this means for how we understand our place in the world. If reality is built through participation, then no one is ever a passive spectator. Even in stillness, we are shaping what unfolds. Every moment we choose to forgive, to listen, to learn, to hope, we are adding to the structure of a world that bends toward meaning. If your life has taught you anything, it is that your choices leave echoes. The way you speak to others, especially when no one else is watching, builds a kind of architecture, one that outlasts the moment. A kind word given freely, a gesture of patience, the act of listening to someone who feels invisible, these are not small things. They are acts of participation in a universe that listens and mirrors us in return. So how do we live inside a participatory universe? Begin by recognizing that your presence holds power. When you pay attention to someone fully, without distraction or agenda, you are saying to them, "You exist. You matter. You are seen." When you wake in the morning and choose to give thanks, even for something as simple as warm sunlight or a breath of clean air, you are aligning with a reality that responds to gratitude. When you pause before reacting and choose reflection instead of reflex, you're not just changing your mood. You're altering the fabric of your own mind and possibly the dynamic of someone else's day. These are not small shifts. They are quantum acts of living with intention. And when the larger world feels heavy, when headlines shake your faith in what is possible, remember this. You are not separate from the whole. You are not watching life from the outside. You are part of the field. Your thoughts, your presence, your awareness are not abstract. They are forces. And the ripple of your quiet decision to be kind, to be present, to be honest, might go farther than you ever know. If we are truly neurons in a vast cosmic brain, then our attention is the signal and our choices are the impulse. So take one step today, just one. Look at something or someone the way you might look at a miracle, because perhaps that is exactly what you are seeing. And perhaps by doing so, you are helping it become just a little more real.